Okay, well, hello everyone. Thanks again so much for joining us today for our last session of the Graduate Careers Exploration Week. Today, as you already know, our panel is on careers and regulatory affairs, which a lot of you may be even wondering what that is. So I'm looking forward to hearing more and looking forward to all your questions as well for our alumni. So just like the last sessions that some of you have attended, I just wanted to repeat some of the housekeeping stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself or put your questions in the chat. But because we have a smaller group, definitely feel free to interact directly with our alums. If you want to turn on your cameras, that's always great to see everyone's faces and not just names on a blank screen. I'm sure alums will appreciate that as well. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you're uncomfortable asking them directly, you can also private message me those questions, and I'm happy to ask them for you. And as I said before, my role is just to facilitate our conversation, but I want you all to be the ones to interact and ask those questions directly. So I'm just gonna be here and moderate any questions or anything else. So I'm just gonna first start off by turning it over to our alumni to introduce themselves. When you were here at Illinois, talk about your experience there, your graduate degree experience and research, and also a little bit about your current roles. So Becca, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thanks. Sorry about that. Hi. Oh, it's weird to look at. So thank you everyone for coming. I'm really excited to talk to you all. My name is Becca Weiner. I am a program manager at Mars Wrigley, the candy company, and the regulatory affairs team. So I completed my bachelor's degree from U of I in chemistry and also in Spanish in 2011. While I was at Illinois, I did work with Kathy Murphy, who was new to the department, which is crazy because now I know she is the department chair, first female department chair. She's awesome. She was a wonderful mentor. And as I was telling Jennifer and Whitney before everyone joined, I had kind of thought maybe I wanted to go into medicine. And then I started doing research in Kathy's lab and kind of decided that I wanted to go more onto the research, more chemistry depth side. So immediately after graduation, I went on to my PhD at Indiana University. I worked for Sarah Scrablak. Sarah is also an Illinois alum. She worked for Ken Susslick for her PhD. So 2 for 2 on my mentors being U of I alumni there. Kathy also went to U of I. In grad school, I worked on synthesis of multimetallic nanoparticles for sensing, the very what I would call fundamental nanoparticle research, which continued my nano research from undergrad. I did a lot of microscopy, a lot of laboratory work, a lot of writing. I knew I wanted to go into industry while I was in graduate school. And actually, while I was at Indiana, I worked on starting the Chemistry Career Development Symposium, where we brought in alumni and other folks to talk about their careers in industry to sort of help students learn about careers, because this sort of thing was not available at that time. And so I graduated in 2016 and I did a postdoc at the FDA. So that's where my regulatory life turned a little bit. So I was still doing research at the FDA. I so I'm based in Chicago now. I'm from Chicago. So I was based by Midway Airport, just outside the city, doing research on polymer nanocomposites. So basically mixing nanomaterials with polymers and looking at those as model food contact materials, and then looking at migration of nanoparticles and metals from those food contact materials into foods or model food substances like water or acetic acid. So it was a postdoc for 2.5 years, and then I moved on to Mars. I actually started in Mars Inc. on the corporate side, working in quality. So I worked on method development for our factories. So I got to go to a lot of chocolate factories, pet food factories, worked a little bit on gum, mostly with chocolate though, which is fun and cool matrix to get to work with. And then a year and a half ago, I started on our regulatory affairs team. So now I'm a program manager in our regulatory affairs team. I have two aspects to my role. One is that I work with our packaging innovation team. So from my background in packaging and my technical background, I work with them to ensure compliance and to problem solve. So we're working with new sustainable materials. So I'm sure you all saw, but in Australia, we just released like a paper-based packaging material. And as we work with some of these really new to the market and new to Mars materials, there's a lot of new problems that we need to work out. So working, also with our legal teams and working also with R&D. So having that technical background is really helpful. The other aspect of my role is our colors team. So Mars makes a lot of products that are colored. So like gum, M&Ms, Skittles. And so we use a lot of colors, both artificial and non-artificial. So working with our regulatory agencies, working with like trade associations, so like the International Association of Color Manufacturers, to advocate for new, to protect our current colors and also for new colors. So we just got calcium carbonate approved in Hong Kong as a food color additive. And I have a global role. So I work across the world. And then I'm based in Chicago, like I said. I have a almost 9-month-old baby. You might hear him. He's home today from daycare. So we live in the city, big runner. I ran the Illinois Marathon when I was in Champaign 100 years ago. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me. Pass it to you, Whitney.
Thanks. That was really interesting to hear like your side of things. My name's Whitney Sinclair. I did my PhD in chemical engineering at the University of Illinois. Before that, I did my undergrad at the Colorado School of Mines in chemical engineering, and very similar experience. Like I had a female mentor who was a professor who kind of got me into research, and I started studying different cyanobacteria. And I just realized like I love biology. I've got to like stay in the biology realm because I thought like traditional chemical engineering was like a bit boring. And so then I went to do my PhD and I studied under Professor Kennis and Professor Leckband. And I was co-advised, so that was like really interesting getting two different advisors' perspectives. My project was studying lung tissue on microfluidic platforms. So just mimicking the dynamic lung environment on like really small sample sizes. Obviously did a lot of research in grad school, tons of writing, publications, and defenses. I also did a lot of work in grad suite. And I just like absolutely loved grad suite. I loved being around women, getting support from women, hearing from women in other departments. And that I felt like I learned a ton in addition to more of like the research side of things. And then after grad school, I graduated last December. So December, not this last December, but the one before that. So 2021, I think. I took a year off and I bought a van with my partner and traveled around for 6 months, had fun. I got a job as a hiking guide in Rocky Mountain National Park, and that was like insane. If you guys have questions about being a hiking guide, like we can talk about that too. But I left grad school feeling really exhausted and just like wasn't ready to tackle anything. And so last fall, I started applying to jobs, summer and fall, and I got a job in regulatory sciences working for Regeneron. And um, in grad school, I went to some kind of panel like this, and someone was like, sat down with me afterwards, looked at my resume, said, "You have a great resume. I think you should get some experience in industry in grad school." So one summer during grad school, I got an internship at Amgen in Thousand Oaks, doing regulatory affairs. I didn't know what regulatory affairs was when I got the internship. You just like apply to whatever you can find. And so I wasn't for sure interested in going to regulatory work, but I had run out of money at that point, being unemployed for a year, and I was getting more hits on regulatory sciences jobs. And so I only started 4 months ago at Regeneron. I live in upstate New York, and Regeneron is a pharmaceutical biotechnology company that mostly focuses on different antibody treatments, and I'm absolutely loving it. So I was shocked. Like, I really love the company culture. I feel like I lucked out a lot with that. And what I do on a day-to-day basis is just working on getting approval for their new medications that are done with clinical trials, and they're going to the commercial market. And so I write applications to the FDA to get these drugs approved to bring to like the commercial market. And we can talk about that a little bit more, but that's just in general. So I do lots of writing. I take all these manufacturing documents, quality control documents, and I write that into applications.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing your journey during your PhD and kind of into your roles right now. At this point, do our students have questions? I see Nicholas is unmuted. For anyone else?
I guess I'll jump in. Sorry for not keeping my camera on. I'm also eating lunch and I figure no one wants to look at that. Could you guys both describe a little bit about how you feel your training in grad school? So Whitney, like I know you mentioned writing, how you feel like your training in grad school has prepared you for these kind of regulatory affairs jobs, and what skills do you think, as you know, mid-stage grad students, we should be working on if this is a path we might be interested in taking?
Yeah, I'll just go off your first comment about writing. When I was going through the interview process, they just kept asking, like, do you love writing? And I was like, yeah, sure. You know, like shaking my head at the same time. But then when I started thinking about it, like, I really developed a lot of skills in grad school as a writer and am actually a very good writer, but I would have never left grad school saying that I'm a science writer. And so I think that as you go through grad school, going through the process of writing papers and going through that editing process, getting really difficult criticism from your advisor. It'd be better if that was constructive criticism, but we all know in grad school it's criticism. A lot of the times, like working through that, improving your writing skills, and then ultimately like writing your thesis. If you can continue to develop those skills as a writer, that would help in the career of a regulatory scientist. But I think that's just really beneficial, and understanding how to like read other scientific things. I'll stop for there. You can go ahead, Rebecca.
Thanks. I love hearing sort of what skills you say impacts your job, because I'm sort of the opposite. So I don't actually do a lot of writing. I do a lot of like customer facing. And by customer, I mean like our packaging engineers, and like a lot of communicating. So communication skills, presentations, like being able, I'll assess risk on a material and being able to like as I talk about being able to speak, being able to very clearly explain, like, here is the risk, here's why, this is, and explaining. So like working on your communication skills, which is something you do all the time in graduate school, and also just time management, and really just being super organized. For me, I'm working on dozens of projects at the same time, and I have to keep them all straight. And I think about when I was in graduate school and I'd be running, 15 syntheses at the same time, and you have to keep them all straight, keep all the time straight, make sure, you're adding the reagents at the right time. And I think that actually really transfers over to time management of like, okay, I've got, 10 projects going right now. Which ones are getting, going on market now, which ones are high priority, which ones are low priority. So like time management, prioritization, a lot of the more soft skills that you gain in graduate school.
I think something, I'm not sure if it's similar for your field, but in biotech, there is regulatory scientists, which like write applications. And then there's regulatory affairs, which is more the outer facing side. So like they're the ones interacting with the FDA, asking questions, stuff like that. So I just think that's important to know if you guys are interested in regulatory work, having a distinguishing idea that there's a difference between regulatory sciences and regulatory affairs. Is that similar to your field?
So my team is scientific and regulatory affairs, so it covers both, but we have folks at my level. So I'm a program manager, but then there's also folks that are like scientists is their title at the same level, where they're way more technical. We are not often, we're not as frequently directly interacting with the FDA. Oftentimes it's through our trade associations, and through our we also have a corporate affairs team. So yes and no, but yeah, I think it's a little different too in food versus drugs, right? Like there's a very clear, lengthy drug approval process, which I can't even start to understand. But then for foods, as long as all the individual ingredients are legal or low risk, it doesn't necessarily, it's a different process with the FDA. Though right now I'm interacting through an external law firm, but working on petitioning for an ingredient to be considered GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe. So doing like a GRAS petition with a law firm. So we're not writing it, our lawyers are writing it.
Interesting.
Thank you both. That's very helpful.
I just think if someone doesn't have a question, I just want to say this. Like you were kind of indicating some differences between biotech and then, like more like food products. Like I've never ever worked anywhere that's like more highly regulated. Like my first week on the job, I was shocked. Like the amount of, like, just one example, because I'm technically work in a manufacturing facility. I don't do the manufacturing, but I work in a manufacturing facility, a facility that manufactures drug products that goes into patients. And so in our buildings, like we cannot walk around with a cup that doesn't have a lid on it, because the FDA can come and inspect your facility at any point. And if you're spilling liquids, if there's liquids on the floor, that's a hazard. You could be like, another thing is like putting booties on your shoes anytime it rains outside, because you don't want to be tracking anything that can contaminate samples. And so I have been so shocked by going from grad school, which I felt like there's no government regulation in grad school, compared to
no safety.
Yeah, there's like, it's shocking. Like the number of standard operating procedures that I had to review before I could even start working, and I type at my desk all day, was crazy. So I think that's something to kind of like have in mind, is that there's a lot more rules and regulations working in areas that are heavily regulated, whether that is even food stuff or or
Yeah, our
biotech.
factories are like that too, where you can't drink out of a ceramic mug. Everyone has like an aluminum mug because you can't have ceramic, even if you're in the offices that are attached to the factory.
Yeah.
It's
No
crazy.
cardboard. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
no cardboard because mold and whatever. So just random stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a friend who works in a factory, in Pennsylvania, and like they're nut-free facility. He's not in a production site. He doesn't go into the production site, doesn't really even interact with the production folks, but like he could not bring a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because it is a nut-free facility and the products in there are nut-free. And yeah. Yeah. But I'm in a regular office, so we have a pilot plan, but it's not as strict. So
Good to still put things into perspective, how different it is from grad school and in a more industrial and manufacturing environment. Awesome.
I will say I was super excited when I started at Mars because I got a lab coat with my name like embroidered on it, which like at grad school, we wore lab coats when we used aquaresia, and other than that, did not even really wear a lab coat. So yeah. Sorry.
Unless
totally
someone came to photograph your lab, right?
Yep.
So what were some of the biggest learning curves when you were going into regulatory affairs?
I can start. Let me just take a step back and say when I went into industry from like graduate school, I think with graduate school and like doing academic research, you're kind of looking for like the best, right? You're looking to optimize, you want the highest yield, you want everything to be like perfect, right? Before you submit a before you submit like a manuscript. In industry, so I started in quality. Like in quality, it's like, is this good enough to put on the shelves? Like and food safety is obviously different. But for quality, it was like, is this good enough? And I think that mentality switch of like, this doesn't have to be perfect. I don't need to have like the best precision. It just needs to be good enough for, our consumer to enjoy the product. And then coming into regulatory affairs, like, and I've been in this role for like 18 months. So I was on maternity leave for 6, which is a huge perk of working at Mars. Really nice maternity leave. But I had to learn, honestly, so many regulations, but nothing has to be memorized. So it's more like knowing what resources are available to review the regulations. Like no one's going to come up to me and say like, hey, Becca, what's the paperboard regulation? Tell me now or you're fired. But like, it's important to understand where I can find the paperboard regulation, how to interpret it, like what it applies to. So I think there was just a lot to learn. But that being said, like I was given the opportunity to learn it. Wendy?
Yeah, I'll say something similar because in grad school, we don't talk about regulatory anything ever. And so when I did my internship, I just spent the first month of a 3-month internship essentially Googling like, what is a BLA, a biologics licensing application, which is what a pharmaceutical company will write up to submit to the FDA. What is the FDA if you don't know what that is with regards to regulatory work in biotech? Or we have standards as well, different types of standards to hold our products to, whether that's more on the chemistry of the product or the container that we put it in. So all of these government organizations or different, so you have government organizations that kind of like create rules, but really a lot of times what happens is there's these like harmonizing groups that are international that create standards that governments accept or don't accept. And so I think like Rebecca was saying, like spending time to over time become familiar with, oh, there's a standard on container closure. And that standard tells companies exactly what tests to run in order to make sure that a syringe is going to be safe when you inject a product into a patient. And so that's making sure that the cap comes off. How do you make sure the cap comes off? What force is required there? How do you ensure that the correct amount of drug product comes out of the syringe? And so it's like just becoming familiar with those things over time, and being okay like sitting in meetings and not knowing what they're talking about, but slowly over time like ticking and observing that information. Yeah, like people just love acronyms in industry. It's ridiculous.
I have like a file on my computer that's just a bunch of acronyms that I'm still adding to. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. So Whitney, you mentioned you had an internship. Becca, you had your postdoc in not really similar things, but that kind of helped get you the foot in the door. So what would you say someone who's not had any internship or any experience who's looking for regulatory types of roles?
That's a hard question. I mean, I think it's just like talk to people like what you're doing now, talk to people that are in the kind of role you want, like network, like find, if you're interested in working, in a consumer products company, a CPG company, like talk to someone that, talk to me, talk to someone, and find out what you need to do, and just have a willingness to learn, and like have that show up if you have an interview, that you're willing to learn, that you're just like, and you have strong learning agility.
Yeah, I think it like also if you want to get an internship, like I think first step would be like talk to your advisor. And some advisors like don't really promote internships, but some are more willing for that. And if your advisor is willing to allow you to do an internship, I would 100% take advantage of it, because you might realize, oh, I definitely don't want to stay in academia. I want to go to industry. Or just to build confidence in that decision. Like I didn't want to stay in academia, but then I did an internship, and then I was like, I really don't want to stay in academia. And it can build some confidence there. And then when you start applying to internships, just if you do want to go into regulatory work, go to company specific websites, whether that's in biotech or outside of biotech, and you can just on their careers, you can search for internships and then looking at regulatory affairs or regulatory sciences. And I think one interesting thing about this area is that not many people go to school to be work in regulatory. Like, I don't even know if that's an undergrad. I know you can get different masters in regulatory affairs or regulatory sciences work, but you're not going to be, it might be like an easy in for an internship compared to like applying to a very specific internship that completely aligns with your degree. And I would just say get an internship if you can. I remember applying to like 15 and getting one. So I think that's like a good number to think about. And the application process is also helpful to just go through that application process, because it's a very similar application process for when you apply to a job. So you're not as scared, or the process isn't so unknown when you've already done it previously.
And just to echo what Whitney said, I mean, my team is pretty big, and I'd say the bulk of folks have like nutrition backgrounds, toxicology, chemistry. We have a couple chemies, just so food engineering, bioengineering. So no one is like, oh, I got my bachelor's in regulatory. I don't think that's a thing. So yeah, I'm sure there's a program somewhere, but yeah.
Thank you so much. What other questions do we have from students?
I will one more thing while you guys are thinking of questions. Like I remember getting to my internship and being like so passionate about my grad school work and like going to all these meet and greets and like telling people all these like, here's what I did in grad school, and like no one cared. Like not that they didn't care, they just didn't know what I was talking about. And I think it put it in a bigger perspective because in grad school, everyone is so interested in what you're doing in grad school. But then it made me realize like once you get out of grad school, if you don't stay in the very specific field that you're in, people just want to know that you have these skill sets that are broad. Are you a good writer? Are you a good communicator? Are you good at staying on timelines? Are you good with working with people? Like those are the skills that I think really matter in a lot of fields that aren't exactly R&D specific to your grad school stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And occasionally you do run into someone who's like the same kind of nerd as you are, and you can just get super excited and talk like really. I will say I do handle a few nano things at work, and occasionally get to talk about it just because nanomaterials are an issue in food ingredients and there's a lot of regulation. But it's about avoiding nanomaterials, and all of my work is in making nanomaterials. So it's sort of exact opposite of my PhD, but no one cares about the dissolution kinetics and, you know, a Lemur diagram like that. Yeah, no. So
Yeah, so live it up while you can with all that
Yeah.
information. Like, well, people care about it, really talk about it.
and
'cause
before
you'll
you forget
miss.
all of it.
Yeah.
Questions from students?
Okay, I'll jump in with another question. And this is maybe only tangentially related, but I'm curious as to, so I've had colleagues who have told me they've applied to like 200 plus jobs and gotten 0 interviews. Is that a common experience in when you're applying to jobs in like regulatory affairs? I know you guys have mentioned like people don't have bachelor's degrees in this or whatever. Like, what is like a baseline N number of jobs applied to at least get an interview or like something like that?
Okay. When I graduated with my PhD, I applied. I had a. I mean, it's somewhere. I have a spreadsheet. I think I applied for about 50 jobs, and I interviewed at 2 places. But when I applied for this job at Mars, or my first role at Mars, I applied for far less roles, and I got an interview right away. The difference in how I applied is that, and just generally, like I applied just like on the website, kind of blindly or like through LinkedIn. But what I would recommend that you do when you apply for roles and is like find someone at that company, get a referral, preferably like someone you know or you've worked with. I mean, like if one of you reaches out to me and says like, can you refer me to work at Mars? Like I don't really know any of. I could give you a referral. I can put your name in the system. Whereas like, I guess I can, Whitney, I think some, I think Rachel who just asked this question. So Rachel, like if you talk to Whitney and Whitney went to the hiring manager and said like, hey, I know this person who's applying for a role, I think she'd be a great fit. That's going to help you get an interview more. So I don't think there's like an exact, it's like quality over quantity, I would say. And just like using LinkedIn, I remember going to a panel when I was in graduate school and someone saying like, look around because the people that are here are your network. And I think that's really important. Like you have an amazing network through U of I, and using LinkedIn. I see Patricia's on the call. Patricia introduced me to someone on LinkedIn who worked at the ADA, the American Dental Association. And I didn't end up working there, but like we kind of kept in touch, and like Mars Wrigley has like our dental program. So like we kind of kept, like a working relationship. Like I think just like having relationship-based applications, quality over quantity. So yeah.
I totally agree with everything you just said. I think that when you apply to jobs, like it's so much more likely that you're going to get a job if you know someone at the company. And so whether that means like you contact me and I work at Regeneron and we know each other, like if Rachel wanted to get a job at Regeneron, she could contact me. I would put her name in the system and then it would send her an email to apply to a job. And the minute we do that, the HR is actually going to look at her application and most likely give her an interview. Whereas if Rachel applied and she hadn't done that, you're probably not going to get an interview, just because of the sheer number of people that apply. So your quality over quantity means it's much better to spend time when you're applying for jobs, reaching out to people at companies and getting that connection to then apply to the job, versus just applying to a ton of jobs and then starting to reach out to people and say, hey, I applied to this job at the company. And then, so I work at a company with a little over 10,000 people. Like I've never spoken to anyone at HR other than the person that helped me get hired. So like it's for bigger companies, like it's not like we can just like go around and like chat with HR people that know exactly who's hiring who until you get further up in the company. So I think like that's helpful. And I remember when I was applying for jobs, I wanted to do regulatory affairs and I really wanted to, or regulatory sciences, either one. And I really wanted to work for a company called Organon, which is biotech, but specifically in women's health, which is like, for me, just everything I could ever dream of. And I just linked in Organon regulatory affairs and found someone who I found their name. And then I actually contacted Jennifer. I think I contacted you about getting her email, but I had also messaged her on LinkedIn. And so she finally got in touch with me. We had a like amazing 30-minute conversation. She was like, we would love to, you can see my dog right here. She would love to, we would love to hire you. Like, let me put you in contact with someone that is a hiring manager. And it didn't end up working out because they weren't hiring anyone, but now I have a connection at the company that like the minute a job opens up, if I wanted to switch, like I could, because they like chatting with me. So I don't like the word networking. It personally scares me, but just continuing to like reach out to people and do that is really what's going to help you get jobs. And I think I applied to 20 jobs. I felt like it took so long, like just waiting to hear back from HR. But I think that kind of tees up the next question. So
Yeah, as you were, Rebecca, were you going to add anything?
No,
Yeah.
I saw the next question, so go ahead.
Right. So how far out in advance should you apply for jobs?
I feel like at Mars specifically, we are often trying to move quickly with hiring because there's like hiring freezes all the time. Just still be like, oh, this period we didn't hit our goal, we're on a hiring freeze. So I think when I was in grad school, I applied like 6 months before I graduated, and that was way too early. And people would be like, we need someone to start tomorrow, which I have a colleague, she's a packaging engineer. She like finished her PhD while she was already working. So like that is an option, but it is super stressful. So I maybe like few months. I don't know. I just know it takes a while. So you don't want to say like, oh, a month, because it could take a few months to find a job. So I would say start your like networking, and that's be scary. Start your engagement of external folks early and talk to them, see what's available, and then start applying. And if you see something where you're like, this is the perfect job, yes, relationship building, that's a good way. This is the perfect job, I'm going to apply. I mean, it can't really hurt to apply. There's not like a clear answer. I don't know. What do you think, Whitney?
I felt the same thing, like I wasn't ready to start a job, so I'm not going to start applying. But then it did take like, once I applied to the Regeneron job, it did take like 2 to 3 months to get an interview, to have the interview, to get the relocation paperwork. It does take time. So, but I know there's plenty of people in my lab that got a job lined up a year out from grad school. So
Some companies do that. Yeah.
yeah. So either start a year or 3 months or 6 months. But I definitely think like at 6 months, it's a good time to start updating your resume. Reach out to Jennifer. I don't remember if I had Jennifer look at my resume, but like I sat down with her and like cried about being nervous about applying for jobs like a year before I was even going to apply to jobs, and just like got some paperwork, started thinking about things. So you can do some things beforehand, and then like definitely by 3 months, like you need to be submitting, I think, at 3 months. So if that means you need a month in advance to prep all that work, by 3 months you should be submitting. And then, grad school, it's a little bit more flexible. Like if you need to tell your boss, like, I need to stay an extra month, like they'd probably be so happy for you to stay. So having that flexibility as well in grad school to stay if you need to, or just like if you have the opportunity to like save up and take a month off, and know that you have a little more flexibility that way too.
For sure. That's a good point too, about like you could talk to your advisor about like what their flexibility is. So like, I think I know I defended the end of March, but then I moved in like June or in May. And then I traveled a little bit, and then I started working in like, I think early July. So just depends like on your boss's money too, right? If they can afford to keep you.
And I was only working on my defense, but I know it can be very stressful to be applying to jobs and also doing grad school. And so like keeping that in mind, like if as you're coming up to your defense and you have a lot of things to be done, then maybe you need to start more than 6 months before to preparing these documents, so that you're not stressing out and not applying to jobs and just defending when really you need a job.
And the thing I just thought about with applying to jobs that is a mistake I definitely made is knowing like what is the appropriate level of job to apply to. I applied for roles that are like senior to where I am now, 7 years out of my PhD, when I was like in my postdoc. So that's another thing. If you connect with somebody and you say like, hey, I'm recently graduating, like what are some job titles that are appropriate? So like at Mars, I'd say like scientist, senior scientist, engineer, senior engineer, that's like the appropriate job level. And then I know people that there's a PhD who came in like a little bit too low, honestly. And it's like, yeah, they probably hired her, but she's kind of underhired. So like, I would have said, oh, apply for a more senior role. But yeah, looking back, like I applied for some roles that are just like way too senior. So just knowing what's appropriate. And it looks like Whitney's also.
I like totally agree.
Yeah.
I just remember looking at these jobs, and they would be like 2 or 3 jobs in regulatory sciences, but then one was a specialist and one was a senior specialist and one was something, something, something. And you're just like, what does this even mean? And they always say like, they want you to be highly educated, but then you're like, wait, I know you guys are highly educated, but then I was like, so what's happening? And years of experience, like, is the grad school years of experience count towards industry?
I don't even know if the answer is yes or no, honestly, on that.
It depends on the company. So I think, having someone that at the company can help. But I think the same thing, like senior specialist, like I came in right out of grad school as a senior regulatory sciences specialist. So I think the senior is kind of, I don't know, maybe that's kind of what it sounded like.
That's what I started at Mars as a senior scientist, and now I'm a program manager, which is like the next level up.
Yeah. But like at our company, like above me there's no program management above me. So, I don't know, guys. But it's so embarrassing and then sometimes you just apply to like director jobs because you're like, well, if they don't like me there, then they'll put me somewhere else. But I don't think they will. because
And it's
HR
different,
doesn't get
it's
it.
different people, and HR has no idea. They're the person that's in HR that's looking at your resume most likely knows like, okay, does this person have X? Does this person have Y? Yes, no, which is why it's helpful again to, have a hand. So okay, but just know like you can get a job from cold applying. It's not impossible. It's just easier
Mhm.
with
Well, I just got my job
intro.
cold applying
Yeah,
too,
see?
so it happened.
Yeah.
And then I want to say one thing, someone gave me really good advice. I called like some of the older grad students that had been in industry from my lab that had graduated like my first year of grad school. So they had been in industry 5 years. I didn't want to go into their industry, but I just wanted to call to chat about tips and tricks. Those are really good network where you might feel a little more comfortable reaching out to them. And one of them suggested that if I wanted a job more quickly, then it was better to go apply to jobs that were startups. Because startups, they are quicker to get back to you. So he recommended if I needed a job like that month, I should apply to a bunch of startups like in San Francisco because it's a big bio area. And then I could actually speak with like the person I'd be working with. I could reach out, I could cold call them. Whereas going to apply to a job that's a big corporate company, you can't really like cold call people as easily, and it takes a lot longer to go through HR than just applying to a newer startup with only 20 employees.
Just a different lifestyle at a startup, right? You're going to do a lot more. Like there's probably one person that does my job, Whitney's job, like at a startup, and 5 other jobs, right? Whereas for me, it's like I own like these very specific parts of the business. So
I actually think for regulatory, that's totally true. Like when I was looking at more smaller companies that had regulatory work, they wanted me to have all this experience, like already submitted BLAs, have experience with, well, I don't need to list off acronyms.
because there's no one to teach you, right? Like that's it, you're the show.
Yeah. So for regulatory, it might be better to go into like a bigger company to get that education first. But
I also know at a small company, it's like really well. So my husband works at a small food company, and like having like the big name brands on your resume like really helps at the smaller companies because they know like, okay, you were trained at Mars Wrigley. Mars Wrigley is like a huge reputable company. So yeah.
Well, great advice. So I just wanted to also touch upon, as you mentioned, so many different areas and industries have different timelines. Some are more, you apply, you hear back quicker. But also one of the things with graduate student recruiting, especially for on-campus interviews with companies that we have through our office, a lot of those also actually happen a year in advance, so almost a year and a half, so around the summer. So if you were planning to graduate, say May 2024, this summer is when you would be starting to participate in those on-campus interviews. But yeah, even if nothing works out, then you still have that time. But say you start 6 months before your graduation, then you are missing out on those opportunities. So that's why, as you both said, starting early, whether that's just a networking or, relationship building skill, which can still help you early on as well to, think about your options and choices. Right. So another question there was in the chat was, do you have any additional advice for the application process? And what job aspects did you prioritize in your search, location or salary, environment, your values that you were thinking about during your job search?
I very specifically only applied to roles in Chicago, which made it a lot harder for me to get a job. So my, I guess, boyfriend at the time, now husband, lived here, worked here, and we decided like this is where we wanted to be. So I only applied for roles here, which is probably one of the reasons I applied for so many roles, because I had to be like more, I had just like cast a wider net, because it was like, I need to be in Chicago, so I have to catch something. So for me, that was like top And then I actually didn't really want to do a postdoc. I was like, I want to just get a job in industry. Postdocs temporary, you don't make good money. The federal postdoc I had paid very well for a postdoc, not as well as industry, but way better than like an academic postdoc. And it was like the right location and ended up being a really great opportunity. And I really enjoyed it. But it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. Like it was the only postdoc I applied for. But yeah, so for me, it was like location. And then in my next job search, I wanted to get out of a laboratory. And I wanted to be in CPG, so consumer packaged goods. So like food, Chicago is like a huge CPG food industry. There's a ton of food companies here. So I wanted to be in CPG. So that's sort of what I was looking at. And I wanted to be at a big company because I didn't want to have to move around. I wanted to stay, in a big company where I could move like I did from quality into regulatory and like, I don't know, maybe at some point I'll move into product development. Like being in a big company offers you those opportunities. And so Mars for me was just like a good option. And the role I took, again, I kind of took a step back in that I took a role that was laboratory based, which wasn't 100% what I wanted, but it was the company that I wanted. So I was like, again, this gets my foot in the door. And actually that was ended up being really good because my team was based in Europe. They were based in France. And then there were like a handful of us in Chicago, and there's a laboratory that we used with like some other teams. But we didn't have a lot of the analytical equipment that I needed in Chicago. So I ended up doing a lot of project management and like collecting data from like other teams, other laboratories, and like doing more like management of the projects and like the technical like laboratory work. And that's actually where I discovered that I really like project and program management. So it kind of worked out. So that's a bit of a side comment. But so for me, like my first priority was location, and then I wanted to get it into like a big CPG company. And salary is nice, but just, it worked out, but it wasn't my top priority. So go ahead.
Yeah, and to speak on salary really quick, it's changing based on states, but most times you're applying to jobs and you don't know what the salary range is. So now in Colorado or California and New York, they're required to list the salary names on or salary ranges on jobs. So if you're applying, maybe there's more states like that, but if you're applying in a different state, you can always look at companies that are based in California or New York to get more ranges to maybe be able to like get some leverage if you're trying to negotiate. But just in general, like it's so confusing because number one, you don't even know what level of job you should be applying to. And then you don't even know like if I'm going into regulatory affairs versus sciences versus just some R&D position, like what's the pay going to be? So I kind of don't think that it's like hard to be putting salary as your top priority because you can't even compare because you don't know what the salaries ranges are for these jobs. So if I think salary is a good thing to look at if you have two jobs on the line and that's something you want to consider. But when you're applying, I think it's good to put that a bit behind and think about that later down the road. But for me, I spent a whole year kind of like thinking about what I wanted to apply to in jobs before I started to apply because I took that year off. And I think when I went into it, like my top priority was like I wanted to work for a biotech company because I like without getting personal, because this is probably going to go on YouTube, you know what I'm saying? I've just like seen the impact that having access to medications can have on improving people's lives. And like, I wanted to be a part of that. And I knew that that would give me motivation to go to work, to know that like what I'm doing every day is giving people a better life. I know that's so cheesy, but like that's genuinely what I believe, and like that's what my colleagues believe. And I could say the same thing about chocolate. Like that improves my life on a daily basis. And so that was like my top priority. And then I had like three things. I wanted to work in biotech. I would love to work in women's health, whether that's now or down the line. And then I wanted to like be supportive of my partner, his career. He's a freelance writer and a rock climbing guide. So I had to be around rocks, which is complicated when you're also applying to biotech. And so this job at Regeneron, I was applying to jobs based on location, which I think you guys might also find. And then I didn't exactly really want to go into regulatory sciences, but I knew that I could get my foot in at the door at this company. And sometimes that's what you have to do. And like, luckily, it's been amazing. And I could definitely in another year switch into the exact area of combination products that I want to go into. But for now, I'm really enjoying my job. And then I also wanted to get out of the lab. I just think that I like a little bit more flexibility in my job. And I was looking for a job that, so flexibility, I wanted flexibility, but a lot of times regulatory work is remote work. And I wanted to not have a remote job because I was new and I wanted to, be able to sit down with people regularly. So I got a job where we come into work 4 days a week, and then we have a work from home Friday. So I think that's something that is becoming more accessible, and you can find those things. But I think that's something down the line, like after you in the interview process, you find that out. They're not going to say that on the application unless it's fully work from home. And then just two more things, like in the area of regulatory, it is very flexible. So I know at any point I could get a work from home, fully remote job. Like I could live in the mountains and my partner can guide and I can live my best life. So that's a nice to know that's down the line. And then also about environment, it's really hard to gauge this over interviews, but I wanted to like my manager. So once I was they accepted me, or they gave me an application, I called my manager one more time to have a conversation with them again about like their managing styles, all these different, like following up to make sure that that was something I was going to be comfortable with, and just in general, like asking more company culture questions once I had the job and was going to make that decision.
And just something with being remote or like having that flexibility to work from home. Like for me, I do go into the office. I haven't been in it a few weeks because I have a young child and he's sick. And so he's on a daycare. So it like gives me the flexibility to say like, hey, I'm going to block an hour off. My husband and I have sort of been switching off on his waking hours. Like, okay, I have to, from 9 to 10, like I'm mommy, and then I can work while he's napping, and like having that flexibility, but knowing that I can also go into the office. So Mars has been like extremely flexible with that. I think we're all kind of waiting for them to tell us we have to come in, but it is nice just to have like, it doesn't have to be 100% remote or 100% in the office, like knowing that if you need something, like you have that opportunity. I love it. And my work from home space is honestly just like better than in the office now.
All great advice. I love that. Yeah, Rachel, go ahead.
I'll just keep asking questions. So you guys have both mentioned a little bit about like having to balance like your careers with your partner's careers, and how did that kind of look, especially when you were looking for, like I know you mentioned like applying based on location and like where your partners were at or in their kind of job process. But what did that kind of look like as you like in more detail, I guess.
I'll just speak because I'm unmuted. My partner is just super supportive. I don't know. He just said like wherever I'll go. So that's a vibe you can find in a partner, but not everyone's like that. People need to work. So it was still a lot of communicating with him because I also wanted to be like accessible to him also having a good career. So I think that it's just communication and like starting to chat about where would you want to live, you know, gauging how flexible they are, or like you just having those conversations. Where do you dream about living? Like, how long do we want to live here? Just conversations, I think.
Yeah, I think communication is key. So I'd say like a year before I graduated, we had like kind of had a discussion about like, so I'd been in Bloomington, my husband was here in Chicago. We both grew up in the suburbs, so we had an affinity for Chicago, but he did have like kind of a decision of like, do I want to move to the West Coast? And I said like, whatever you want to do, but then I just need to know so I can apply for jobs. But ultimately for us, being in Chicago is the best option because our families are here. We knew at some point we wanted to start a family. We did. And like, it's really nice, you know, to have our parents close by and our siblings. So it was kind of mutual agreement that we wanted to be in Chicago. So it was, I guess, an easy decision to be here.
I've also done like plenty of long distance with my partner, so that's an option. But I think as you get towards more industry careers, they lock you in. Like if you want to keep that starting bonus, you have to work there for 2 years. Or if you want your stock to vest, that's 4-year commitment. If you want your relocation, if you don't want to pay that back and tax on top of that, you better stay for 2 years. So yeah, Rachel's face says it all. So I think it's not like, oh honey, like I'm gonna be here for 2 years and then we'll move together, because you could be stepping away from like $15,000. And so unless it's a postdoc where you're like, in 2 years I'm going to be done, or 1 year I'm going to be done and we can do long distance, I think it's not always as flexible as you think it is, especially if you're going to work for these bigger companies.
Yeah, or I mean, sometimes like at Mars, like we have hubs. So like, you know, maybe let's say like I accepted a job in Chicago, but I really wanted to be in Waco, Texas. So it's like, okay, I'm now that I'm in the company, I want to look for another job. But honestly, like we were long distance for 5 years and like I did not want to do that. I was done. So during COVID, we hit the inflection point of like being together longer than being apart. And yeah, it's better. But like, you know, we made sort of a sacrifice for 5 years while I was getting my PhD and he was here. And like he works, you know, he was in finance. He went to U of I also, business school. Like there's not like great opportunities in Bloomington, Indiana. So it was like, we both kind of put our careers, and then now we both have great careers here and we have family. So yeah, so it's a discussion.
Okay, I'm gonna come back with another question that has nothing to do with two body problems. So Becky, you mentioned that you did a postdoc. And so I'm curious because a lot of people, like when you talk to people about jobs, like especially like your colleagues or whatever, they're like, if you want to go into industry, like don't do a postdoc. Absolutely not. Like worst thing ever, like whatever. Is that, how has that looked in like the world of like more like regulatory affairs and like other like managerial type jobs?
I don't think there's like a anti-postdoc, like, I mean, the thing is like postdocs are like notoriously underpaid, right? Like overworked. So it's like not the best lifestyle, I guess. So it's like, hey, if you want the industry lifestyle, go get it. You can start it. That being said, I feel like when I was applying for jobs, a lot of jobs said like, hey, you need 2 to 5 years experience and a PhD. So it was like, okay, having a postdoc was like a good way for me to get the experience. And like for me, because I postdoced at the FDA, you know, it was like if you look at my LinkedIn, it says like research chemist / ORI's postdoctoral fellow. So like I used it like a job, I guess. But I would never like look at someone's job application and say like, oh, they did a postdoc. Like, no. I mean, it's just a way to gain more experience. I think it's a personal decision.
I totally think like if you want to go into regulatory and you want to get a postdoc in the FDA, do it. Like having FDA on your resume going into regulatory is going to
Yeah.
help you probably in the long run. But postdocs in general, like I look at things as like financial decisions. A lot of times, I know I said don't think about salary too much, but like you already are getting paid such little as a grad school in grad school. Like I came out with an engineering degree from undergrad, and my friends for 5.5, 6 years were getting engineering salaries. And then I felt like I was behind because I was getting paid a graduate student salary and then I was going to get a PhD, and I'm still questioning if like that PhD is going to give me a salary that'll ever make up for like the 5 years that I wasn't able to invest in my 20s. And so I think about those decisions, and unless you really are excited about the postdoc or you think it's going to benefit your career, like the pay thing is just kind of hard to wrap my head around.
I'll just say, because
justifying it.
I'm for salary transparency, like a typical postdoc is like maybe 40K. It's a good one at the FDA was paid like closer to 80. So
Yeah,
that is a really
yeah.
good, but when I entered industry, it was even higher. So it's like, yeah, it's like better. It's not the best, but like, yeah, I think the FDA, if you want to go into regulatory, like that's a really good place to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. It's invest money when you're young, even if it's just a little bit. But it's hard because you're making a stipend. It's not even a salary, right? Like for 5 years, and your friends who all have science degrees and business degrees are out making a ton of money. So
I remember my first year of grad school. This is not about regulatory sciences, but just good advice for you guys to hear. Like my first year of grad school, I sat down with a financial advisor, and they just asked me like, do you have any financial goals? And I said no. And then they were like, well, do you ever want to buy a house? And I was like, yeah. And then they were like, do you ever want to have a family? I was like, yeah. And then they were like, well, do you want to pay for your kids' college education? I was like, yeah, that'd be nice. And then I was like, whoa, I have financial goals. And so it kind of changed the way I looked at money in grad school. And I was able to open up a Roth IRA, start saving
that's
money.
so smart.
I started
awesome.
seeing how much money I could save and how that felt, like that feeling of putting stuff away. And so even though it isn't a lot, just to start those practices is such a confidence builder. And I know everyone comes from different situations, so you can't compare yourself to other people, but it is a great time to start thinking about those things, because once you graduate, then you're in your late 20s and you're like, oh my God, I could buy a house. Like I could not a year ago even think about buying a house, and now I'm like, I could. Should I? I don't know. So it's.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Like if you can put $100 a month in the market, $50 a month in the market over 5 years, you're not touching it, it's going to grow. And I think, yeah, because you're not contributing to a 401k, right? Because you're a graduate student. So yeah, super smart, Whitney.
Yeah.
Super
And then
smart.
like once you get a 401k, you're like, oh my God, I can put more than 6,500 a year. Like this is crazy. Like it's just, you can really expand on that as like you
Yeah.
get into
Yeah.
these jobs.
And that is a thing with the postdoc, is that like you don't start the 401k. So like I didn't really start a 401k until I was almost 30. So it's just like, whereas like my husband started at 22. So it's like, okay, there's this huge gap because he started working right out of college.
And that's what I was saying, like comparing myself. Well, I said don't compare, me comparing, like comparing myself to my friends, like they had so many more years to do that. But I also think that in grad school, it's really beneficial to live a more minimal lifestyle, because I think a lot of my friends who made a lot more money, they don't know, they're not as good as their money. So I think that you're still learning really valuable skills, living off of, a grad student salary. And one other thing, I did think about where to live in terms of cost of living. Like I thought about applying to Amgen. I did apply to jobs there, and just to think about, Amgen's in Thousand Oaks, California, which has a higher cost of living than Albany, New York, and that's something that I knew that I cared about, would make me less stressed day to day.
Yeah, we live in expensive cities. But I live in the city, and I live in Chicago, which is more affordable than the coast. So, and our family's here. So, yeah.
That helps so much with like, and this is random, I'm feeling this too, but I work with a lot of women. I don't know if your regulatory sciences team has a lot of women,
We have one man.
I just love it. Like I didn't know that was going to be a thing, but I mostly work with women, and like I said, I did a lot of grad squeeze stuff, and so I just knew I liked working with women, so that was a nice little treat coming out of it.
Yeah, my team is also, my manager, our VP is female. We have one male contractor and then one regulatory specialist that's male, and everyone else is women. I think in the food space, because a lot of folks have nutrition backgrounds and nutrition skews more female. So I think that's one of the reasons. But yeah, it is interesting because on the quality side, it was more like people with backgrounds in the hard sciences. So it was more men.
But there are men on this call, so I just want to say I also work with men.
Yeah.
There's plenty of them, but I do like that there's like more women.
Yeah.
And like then no one in grad school had kids, and then coming into industry and seeing all these women have kids and have successful careers, like it's a confidence builder if I do end up starting a family.
Yeah. And about that, Mars, with like a big perk of Mars, like I mentioned, I had 24 weeks of paid maternity leave, which is just amazing. And men are non-birthing parents. So like if you were to adopt a child, like get 18 weeks. So it's really best in class. Yeah, it's wonderful. And like, it's a great, it was the best. I mean, I wish I had double, but it's just, you could always have more, but it was really nice to just be with my son for 5.5 months and like get to just be a mom and bond with him. So.
Awesome. I love how you're also adding life advice to this career panel. I'm sure our students are appreciating all this advice that they could take advantage of while even being at their institutions right now. And again, as you said, determining your location or your values or what you prioritize in your job search, if you start later in the process towards graduation or before your defense, it's going to be a lot harder to think about those because, at that time you're stretched too thin. You're going to think about, I need a job as opposed to I need to plan these out early on in advance. Right.
And I think doing an
Yeah,
internship gives you the opportunity to have a little bit, you can start thinking about those things a little bit more.
Absolutely. One other question I guess I could ask, you all had given an overview of your roles initially, but could you tell us a little bit more in depth about what your day-to-day in each of your roles looks like? How much time do you spend in meetings? How much time do you do like those hands-on work? A little bit more of a breakdown into your roles.
Sure, I can go. A lot of my days is spent on meetings. I mean, most days like at least 4 hours on calls, because I sit on a lot of project teams, which is really nice. It's like that I'm sort of part of the R&D packaging team with like the packaging engineers and the design folks and the, sustainability team. So just like got really included. That being said, it's a lot of time on the phone. Sometimes it's even more. So just like a typical day, because I'm on a global team. So my team, there's most of us are in Chicago, and then there's one woman in the UK and one in China. So with the time difference, we start most of our meetings at 7 a.m. Occasionally I have meetings at like 6:30, which is a huge benefit to working from home, that because pre-COVID, I would be in the office for a 7 a.m. call, which meant I was, getting up in the 5s. And now it's like for a 7 a.m. call, I can get up at, 6:30, sometimes a little bit later. And then, just be home. And so I'm usually on calls. If I don't have early calls, I'll try and sleep a little bit more or work out. And then sort of the hands-on aspect of what I do is I put together a lot of decks. So Mars is really big on like capital A Agile, which is like a framework for project management. I don't think we actually do it in the correct way, but one of the big principles of Agile is like not having, and this is obviously different when you're like submitting to the FDA, but like not having like lengthy documents, and like when we can do things in a more straightforward means. So like I put together a lot of decks of like, hey, here's like a risk assessment, like here are the risks, here's maybe how we can mitigate them, here's how we can work together, versus like maybe 10 years ago, maybe we would have put a report up. And actually 10 years ago, Mars would have said, hey, there's a risk, we're not doing it. Whereas now we're sort of embracing risk of like, what's the likelihood of the occurrence? What would happen? Like what's worst case scenario? What would happen to the company? So putting together a lot of decks, reviewing a lot of documents. So reviewing compliance documents, like a declaration of compliance, like a letter from a factory saying that they use good manufacturing processes. And we have like, and then looking at migration testing, which is where my main like technical part of my role comes in, like seeing what migrates from a food contact material like into the food, to make sure that it's safe and compliant, right? We don't want to adulterate food. What else do I do? I'm on a lot of meetings, so with project teams, also with like our trade associations, and then also internally. So for example, right now the FDA is looking at removing red 3 as a food additive. It's a colorant, based on some like really bad science, that's just not really applicable. So like working with corporate affairs and working with our toxicologists of like, how are we as a business going to discuss, do we support this? Do we, are we gonna, go against it? Are we for it? And like discussing some of these things that are happening with the FDA. Yeah, every day is kind of different. So hopefully that kind of, and if I'm in the office, which I do go into the office at least once a week, sometimes more, I try to have all of those meetings face to face. So I try to, like stack all my in-person meetings so that I'm not doing a lot of computer work that day. I can do a lot of like face to face, building my network, meeting people, knowing people. So, okay, hopefully that kind of explains all the things that I do in a day or in a few days, I guess.
Yeah, I would say every day is different. Definitely, that's something in regulatory sciences is true as well. I know that if you want to go into more like manufacturing, most days are more similar than if you're working in the reg area. And then, so for me, like, I get up every day and I get to work by 8. I pick up my free coffee because they have free coffee at our company. That's pretty cool. Maybe pick up a free banana because they have those lying around, like lots of free stuff all the time. And then with my lid on my coffee, walk up to my cubicle. We work in a cubicle farm. I was nervous about that. It's like pretty chill. We have like standing desks at our facilities and like treadmill desks around, so you can always work in like different areas. These are the things I really cared about when I started working. Like, they're just exciting. So I want to share like some exciting things you guys might have to like look forward to. But then I have about like 3 hours of meetings. That's also with different teams on different projects. We do a lot of training at Regeneron. So because it's a manufacturing facility, like, you might have to get trained on an SOP or go to a training or go to a technical writing training. But those are kind of becoming more few and far between as you get into your job. But I spend, I'll start the day and I'll start writing sections. And when I say I'm writing a section, that usually means like finding source documents. So finding, I don't know if you guys know what good manufacturing practices are, GMP. So when you work for a larger corporation, you have all these like GMP documents. So these very formal documents that we write up all these standards and reports on that we're including in our application. So it's like finding those source documents and then sitting down, pulling up different comparable sections from other drug molecules, and then sitting to write my specific section for my drug molecule. So it's a lot of like puzzle work solving, like, where are the sources, what are other examples, and then what am I going to write? So that's what I spend a lot of time doing. And then the meetings are usually like, I'm submitting drug X, this application's due at the end of the year. And so I'm writing section 1, and I'm going to meet with the whole team that's writing this application for drug X, and I'm going to give them updates on like, what have I done for section 1 for the entire application. And there's lots of like, I still have office hours. My company has office hours once a day where you can go in regulatory sciences and like speak with your managers and ask them questions. Or we have working sessions where like all the writers for drug product X will come together and we'll ask questions, keep each other updated on what we've been doing. Lunchtime, take a little break, few more meetings, little lull around 3, grab another coffee, sit down and do some more writing. So
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, both of you. So we have about 6 more minutes left towards the end of the time. Any other last minute questions from those who are still here? Okay, Lauren asked, if you aren't able to get an internship or your advisor doesn't support it, is that a big setback to finding a job in regulatory? No.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so either. I think it's just nicer to get your head in the game and maybe give yourself a little advantage, but
And see if you like it.
Yeah, it's totally not necessary.
Yeah, then that's when a lot of that networking and relationship building with alums and people in those types of roles would be helpful.
You can always ask your advisor, like, they should have a general list about where people are working from those labs. So you can ask your advisor to give you like a list of companies and then the contact information for those people to find contacts. Another way to find contacts is like, go to your department head. And if you tell your department head, hey, I want to work for a biotech company, can you like get me some contacts? who work at biotech companies that have graduated with PhDs from our departments. That's another helpful way to make contacts if you weren't able to get an internship.
And if your advisor is like younger, so they don't have these like generations. So when my advisor, like I was there when her first PhD graduated, I think she started like 3 years after I started. So, but she has a network of like people she went to graduate school with, right? So like use your, if you've got a younger advisor where like there's not this like lineage, feel free, to reach out, ask them with help with their network. And like I'm sure most of them would be really happy to, because they want you to get a job because it looks good when you're applying.
And I definitely one thing to say is don't go to these people saying don't come to me saying, I know you work at Regeneron, I want a job at Regeneron, can you get me the foot in the door? What you can say is you can say, hey, I see you work at Regeneron, I'd love to hear more about what you do day to day and learn about your job and where you live and what you like and dislike. And that's just, don't do the first thing that I said. Do the sly ways. And then
yeah.
And then even at the end, you're not really going to be like, will you help me? They're going to offer it if they want to.
Or at the end, you could say, okay, based on this conversation, I saw this role, would you be willing to help me?
Yeah.
And if you add someone on LinkedIn, also just a general, I get a lot of cold, just LinkedIn ads that are graduate student at Indiana. And I'm like, okay. But if they said 2 things hey, I'm in I don't care if they were in my advisor's lab, I'm in Steve Tate's lab and I'm interested in working in industry. Can you add me on LinkedIn? Yes, don't care. Totally happy to add you. So, but if it's just a blank, I don't know who you are, I'm probably not going to accept it.
Yeah. And we went to the same grad school. I'm so curious to hear about your job.
Yeah.
That genuine interest will come across for sure.
People like talking about themselves. So if you
Yeah,
ask people,
I've had the best time today, guys.
yeah, this has been so nice.
Absolutely. This is great advice. And this is also stuff we share with our students too. When you're connecting or reaching out to people or even alums at your institutions, don't just send a blank connection request. Add something, add that you're a student in the department. I also noticed that you were an alum, would love to connect and learn more about your career path or your journey. And to add on to what Whitney said, besides going to your advisor, besides going to the department, you can also come to our office and we are more than happy to help you out with that as well, because we also know amazing alums who are doing amazing things. So yes, absolutely.
And Jennifer does really good practice interviews too. I did a practice interview with her that was really helpful, and she told me I'd get the job, and I got the job. So she never lies. So do the practice interview.
Yeah, well, you were very well prepared, so I'm sure that was the part of it. Well, great. Thank you so much for all your advice, for all the information, knowledge, and words of wisdom that you shared with our students here today. I'm sure Rachel is giving some rounds of applause and a virtual round of applause for all of you here. Even to the students who are here who've asked engaging questions and kept this conversation going. We really appreciate you and your time being here. So as I said during the beginning of the session, sessions will be recorded. All of them have been recorded and they will be posted on our YouTube channel and Media Space channel next week. So keep an eye out for all of that. But thank you again, alum, so much for your time and for being here today. Would you be open to connecting with students on LinkedIn? Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I hope you all have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Rebecca.
Bye, everyone.